Everyone, especially to you, ma'am. I'm Rapi Adorimos from Salay, Misamis Oriental. Um, Today, we will discuss the topic about origin of fingerprints, personalities that contributes to fingerprints identification, important dates and events of fingerprints. First of all, we will discuss or tackle the history of fingerprint identification or the origin of the fingerprint. The use of fingerprint goes back to ancient times, although the use of DNA evidence is considered more accurate today. In ancient Babylonia and China, thumbprints and fingerprints were used on clay tablets and seals as signatures. The idea that fingerprints might be unique to individuals dates from the 14th century. In 1686, the psychologist Marcelo Malpighi examined fingerprints under a microscope and noted a series of ridges and loops. In 1823, another psychologist, John Porkenzie, noted that at least 9 different fingerprint patterns. The pioneer in fingerprint identification was Sir Francis Galton, an anthropologist by training who was the first to show scientifically how fingerprints could be used to identify individuals. Beginning in the 1880s, Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin, studied fingerprints to seek out hereditary traits. He determined through his studies not only that no two fingerprints are exactly alike, but also that fingerprints remain constant throughout an individual's lifetime. Galton published a book on his findings in 1892, in which he listed the 3 most common fingerprint types: loop, whorl, and arc. These classifications are still used today. It didn't take long for law enforcement officials to recognize the potential value of fingerprint evidence. Sir Edward Richard Henry, a British official stationed in India, began to develop a system of fingerprint identification for Indian criminals. Henry created 1,024 primary fingerprint classifications. In Argentina, Juan Vucetich, a police official, also used Galton's finding to create a fingerprint system. He used Galton's He used Galton's research to make a fingerprint identification of a murder in 1892. We will proceed to the personalities to contribute the fingerprint identifications. First, Thomas Bewick, 1753 to 1828, a British author, naturalist, and engraver, became England's finest engraver who made fingerprint stamps. He made wooden engravings of fingerprints and published their image in his books, where he used an engraving of his fingerprints as a signature. The engraving demonstrates familiarity with the construction of skin ridge. In 2 of the books, he added Thomas Bewick, his mark under the impressions. Sir William G. Herschel, he is credited as being the first European to recognize the value of friction radio points and to actually use them for identification purposes. During his first year at Jong Jonggi-4, he entered into a contract on behalf of the civil service with a local native Red Redhayad Harkonai to supply road building material. Herschel had observed a local practice of putting a friction ridge print of hand finger beside a signature or mark on contracts. Contracts having signatures accompanied by a friction ridge print appeared to command more respect from the locals, and disputes were less frequent. On the back of the road contract, Herschel asked Konai to apply his right palm print in ink. Later, he claimed to have been the first to use friction ridge prints for personal identification purposes. His claim was based on the use of palm print on the Konai contract. In 1860, he was sent to Nadia as magistrate and collector at Hooghly. He controlled the criminal courts, the prison, registration of deeds, and payment of government pensions. He implemented the use of fingerprinting in any area under his control. Herschel's experiments with friction ridge resulted in the first demonstration of friction ridge persistency. He first fingerprinted himself in 1859. Over the following years, he reprinted himself and compared those prints with previously taken prints to ascertain if they had changed. Dr. G.C.A. Mayer in 1788 of Germany. He published the following statements in his anatomical atlas. Although the arrangement of his skin ridges is never duplicated into persons, nevertheless the similarities are closer among some individuals. In others, the differences are marked, yet in spite of their peculiarities of arrangement, all have a certain likeness. This deduction was published 100 years before the Konai contract. Next, Dr. Henry Folds. Dr. Henry Folds in 1843 to 1930. In 1875, Folds had opened a missionary hospital and a year later started a medical school in Japan where he may have been exposed to fingerprints. He wrote a letter to Charles Darwin telling him of his studies and requesting assistance. He mentioned that fingerprints can be classified easily that each detail is unique. He pointed out the value of fingerprint as being in medico-legal studies and commented that photographs of people change over the years but rogue friction ridges never change. Folds also mentioned apprehending criminals by locating fingerprints at crime scenes. Both Herschel and Folds published letters in Nature. Herschel claimed he had used fingerprints for years in India and offered the Hooghly letter as documented proof. Folds claimed carefully study in Japan and to be the first person to publish notice the subject in English literature. Thomas Taylor, 1877, a microscopist of the Department of Agriculture, Washington, D.C., who also suggests that fingerprints could be used to solve crime. Hand marks under the microscope exhibited on a screen view of the markings of the palms of the hands and the tips of the fingers, and called attention to the possibility of identifying criminals, especially murderers, by comparing the marks of the hands left upon any object with the impressions in wax taken from the hands of suspected persons. In the case of murderers, the marks of bloody hands would present a very favorable opportunity. This is a new system of palmistry. Alphonse Bertillon, 1853 to 1914. He devised the first the first truly scientific method of criminal identification in Paris, France, called anthropometry or Bertillonage. He conveys he conceived the idea of using anatomical measurements to distinguish one criminal from another. He decided to use various body measures such as head length, head breadth, length of left middle finger, length of the left cubit forearm, length of left foot, body body height, fist breadth, fist height, and other descriptions, including features such as scars and hair and eye color to the distinguished criminals. As time went by, he eventually included fingerprints on the near end of his anthropometric cards as a final check of identification. He has been described as one of the greatest scientists in the 19th century. Galton was of the opinion that fingerprinting might be a better method of identification. He added fingerprinting to this presentation of Bertillonage and entitled to lecture Personal Identification and Description. Will West and William West case from 1870 to 19,000. The Bertillon system of anthropometric system of identification based on measurements of height, head, and other parts of the body was accepted by the police department as a means of identification. But it so happened in 1903 that one Will West was arrested by the police and was identified by a police officer as having a previous conviction. But Will West denied the same. When his measurements were taken, it was found out that they were the same as one of the Mr. West who was serving a life sentence in a jail for murder. Further inquiries revealed that there was one Mr. West in prison having the same facial resemblance and also body measurements. In this case, there was a coincidence of the similarity of names and body measurements according to Bertillon system and similar photo features. It was the fingerprints only that proved that West in prison and suspect West were different individuals. The importance of fingerprints came to light from this notable case of West who were twin brothers. Dr. Henry P. DeForest. He utilized the first official municipal use of fingerprints for non-criminal registration on December 19, 1902 in the Municipal Civil Service Commission in the city of New York. He required civil service applicants to be fingerprinted to prevent them from having better qualified persons take tests for them and put the system into practice. Captain James I. Park. He advocated the first state and final use of fingerprint, which was officially adopted in Sing Sing prison on June 5, 1930 and later at Auburn, Napanoch, and Clinton Penitentiaries. Sergeant Kenneth Perrier, an Englishman and first fingerprint instructor at the St. Louis Police Department, Missouri. He was one of the pupils of Sir Edward Richard Henry, and through personal contact during the World's Fair exposition held in St. Louis, a fingerprint bureau was established on April 12, 1904. Major R. McClory. McClory was the warden of the Federal Penitentiary of Leavenworth when the Office of the Attorney General of the U.S. granted permission to establish a fingerprint bureau there on November 2, 1904. It was the first official national government use of fingerprints. Mary K. Holland. She was the first American instructor in dactyloscopy. Harry Mears 11. In 1925, he installed the first official foot and fingerprint system for infants at the Jewish Maternity Hospital, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA, the first system in the state. 1. Ivan Vukitich, 1855 to 1925. The fast pace of the advanced fingerprinting in England was due to the ingenuity of one Vukitich, who was employed as a statistician with the Central Police Department of La Plata, Argentina. In July 1891, the chief of police assigned Vukitich to set up Borio anthropometric identification. He started experimenting with fingerprints, set his own equipment for taking criminals' fingerprints. Sir Edward Henry in 1850-1931. He was head of the Scotland Yard in London at the turn of the 20th century and developed a classification system for cataloging fingerprints based on common patterns that are present on each finger. This became known as the Henry classification system, which he developed in India at the same time that Vukitich was experimenting with fingerprinting in Argentina. Today, this Henry system has been replaced by the computerized worldwide database of the AFIS, or the AFIS. In 1891, he was appointed Inspector General of Police for Bengal Province. Upon taking his new post, Henry found the anthropometric system was being used to identify criminals. He developed some doubts about the accuracy of the anthropometric measurements that were being stored in the files. He also found that close supervision during the collection of data was very difficult. In India, his course of action was to instruct that all fingers of each prisoner to be printed and added to the anthropometric cards he assigned to Bengali police officers to study the classification problem. Henry's team was eventually successful in setting up a classification system with 1024 primary positions and secondary breakdowns. In 1899, Henry was invited by the British Association for the Advancement of to present a paper at Dover. He returned to England and presented a paper entitled Fingerprints and the Detection of Crime in India. He also described the successes and uses of fingerprinting in India. He published a book entitled Classification and Uses of Fingerprints. In 1918, the Henry classification system started what is considered the modern era of fingerprint identification, which is the basis for most of the classification presented. Use fingerprinting in North America in 1877 to 19,000. Asia West Tabor, 1880. In 1880, a photographer in San Francisco suggested that fingerprinting be adopted for the registration of Chinese immigrant laborers. Gilbert Thompson in 1882, he used his thumbprint to ensure that the amounts were not changed or altered on payroll checks when issuing a payroll check. He would put an inked thumbprint over the amount. This is to prevent fraudulent check alternations. Mark Twain in 1894. An American author and lecturer, Twain enhanced the possession of fingerprints when he included their use in the plot of a novel entitled Pod Head Wilson. In the novel, a bloody fingerprint is found on the murder weapon and Pudd'nhead. The defense attorney has the whole town fingerprinted. He lectured the court and jury on the basics of fingerprinting, how fingerprints are immutable, and that two fingerprints will never be found to be the same. He also commented on how identical twins can be indistinguishable in appearance at times even by their parents, but their fingerprints will always be different. That's all, ma'am. Thank you.